So back in June, in the course of 1 week, there were two big votes in the House of Commons. One was concerning the beginning of life, abortion, and the other was at the end of life, assisted suicide. So the first vote was on Tuesday the 22nd of June, and MPs voted in a 70-30 split to decriminalize abortion. So our abortion laws were already the most liberal in Europe, but in just 48 minutes, without it having been included in any party manifesto, without any proper debate, our MPs made the biggest change to abortion law in this nation since the 60s. And then just 3 days later, in a much more publicized vote, but also a much tighter vote, a majority of just 23, our MPs voted to legalize assisted suicide. Despite the pleas from doctors and nurses and disability support groups and hospices and care homes, despite the fact that it is the most vulnerable and the weakest in our society who will likely be harmed by such a law, despite the evidence from other nations of how crossing this line leads to a slippery slope, that also passed the MPs. So two votes at either end of life. What one MP said in the House of Commons in the debate, on the record, he said, we have a chance to neatly bookend the week by establishing the right of the individual to choose how to exit this earthly realm. So it's a neatly bookending the week. That's how the MP felt it had gone. I wonder how you felt about it. Anger? Grief? Sadness? I want to acknowledge as we begin that perhaps for some here this morning, one or both of those votes are perhaps a little bit more complex than that. Perhaps it affects you personally, maybe a loved one who has taken their life through suicide, or perhaps abortion is a part of your story. So this topic brings up a complicated response. If that last one is you, I do want to say loud and clear, as right from the beginning, because so often this is an area we can cause pain if we don't get our words right. And if I don't get it right this morning, if I don't speak with truth and grace, please forgive me and please tell me afterwards. But I do want to say loud and clear from the beginning, truth and grace. Truth, whether in the womb or the palliative care ward, the truth is that it is for God to give and take life. But grace as well. We believe there is such grace, don't we? Such mercy through Jesus, who we've been singing about this morning. He died for sinners, and he brings such freedom from guilt, such freedom from shame. He takes what's broken and he makes it whole. He takes what's tainted, he makes it clean. He forgives sins. So this morning, here's the plan. The entire book of Habakkuk is our text, and what we're doing is formulating a response to those two votes in Parliament. Thinking, what do we do as Christians when our MPs choose death over life? But it is broader just than that. What do we do when anything in life doesn't go the way we expect? Whenever our prayers aren't answered, how do we respond? And our journey through Habakkuk will be summed up in 4 words. I'll tell you what they are right at the beginning, and that's because the first 2 words are kind of gloomy. And I want to assure you that we do not stay in the gloom. So 4 words. We start with lament, then defeat, then faith, then joy. Lament, defeat, faith, and joy. So have Habakkuk chapter 1 open in front of you. Let's begin with our first word. Next slide. That is lament. Verse 1, we're told, this is the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. Habakkuk's very different from other prophets in the Bible. Most of them, you'll know this, they're telling God's people, or the leaders of God's people, they're telling them where they've gone wrong. But Habakkuk is telling God where he's gone wrong. We get a window into his private prayer life, really, and it's amazing because you see his honesty before God. And I want that to encourage us, by the way, that we can be honest before God about how we feel. Habakkuk does it, so can we. In verse 2, he cries out, "O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear, or cry to you violence, and you will not save?" Violence, that's the word he uses most often in this book. Violence is the norm in the land of Israel where he's writing. We get an insight from one of Habakkuk's contemporaries, Jeremiah. Jeremiah says in chapter 22, when he's writing to the king, "Your eyes and your heart are set on dishonest gain and shedding innocent blood, and on oppression and extortion." That's the situation in the nation of Israel when Habakkuk's writing. Violence everywhere. And as far as Habakkuk could see, God was nowhere. He's been crying out in prayer, but God's not listening. He's been praying for some time. That's clear from the how long in verse 2, but God's not intervening. God's not responding. Do you ever fear or feel that God is not hearing your prayers? You're praying for something, you think, well, this is clearly good. This is a good thing to pray, but in return, you've just received that deafening silence. And I wonder, do you feel that at all in the wake of those votes in Parliament in June? You prayed. As a church, you prayed. As an individual, you prayed. As a nation, we prayed. We had national days of prayer. We lifted up our voices to God, and the vote went the wrong way anyway. Oh Lord, how long shall we cry for help? And you will not hear. Verse 3, he uses that word violence again. Destruction and violence are before me. And make no mistake, it's framed in terms of compassion and autonomy and health care. But the taking of a life is always violence. I'm not going to describe the processes of abortion or assisted suicide, but in both cases, we're doing to the body what was not meant to be done. So how do we respond? Well, like Habakkuk, he laments. And he laments quite audaciously. He says to God in verse 3, "Why do you idly look at wrong?" God, you're just idle up there. But God doesn't censor him. God doesn't smite him. God doesn't smack him down. God allows the question, doesn't he? The Bible's full of people who love God, saying to God, "I have no idea what you're doing. I have no idea why you didn't answer that prayer. I have no idea why you allowed that vote to pass." What might you say to God? "I have no idea why... ... God welcomes that. He welcomes honest lament. He welcomes it when we say, "I have no idea what you're doing. Even I don't like what you're doing." And Habakkuk then continues, verse 4. He says, "The law is paralyzed. Justice never goes forth. The wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted." So what's the purpose of the law? According to Scripture, primarily it's to protect life, to provide justice. Yet as we look to these votes, they've failed to protect life. They've not provided justice. In fact, it's injustice enacted into law. Think back 15 years ago, 2010, a woman named Sarah was 39 weeks pregnant, within days of giving birth. No risk to her own health or that of the baby. She was not under duress. She took the life of her child. And the only apparent motivation was to hide an affair that she'd been having from her husband. As a result, she was prosecuted. She pleaded guilty. She received a short prison sentence. And there was no great outcry from the media or the public. And why not? It's because justice says we protect that vulnerable life. Yet now, following the law change in Parliament, there would be no legal consequence for such an act. No justice. There are already a 250,000 abortions in England and Wales each year. And heaven knows we understand that so many women feel like they don't have a choice. Yet this vote, all it will do is increase that number. When they made this change in New Zealand, the figures went up 43% in 1 year. And so we lament. And at the other end of life, as this new law looks to be enacted, some vulnerable people will feel that pressure to choose assisted suicide, to prematurely end their life. Or maybe they'll choose death because they feel a burden to those around them. And in some wicked scenarios, they'll be deliberately coerced into it. And so what do? We lament. We ask, how long will it be before we have situations in Canada where people are offered euthanasia simply because they've gone deaf in one ear? If you're saying yes to that, the real issue is not deafness, it's depression, and we're offering death as the cure. How long till we walk the path of the Netherlands, where people receive euthanasia for loneliness or autism? Habakkuk gives you permission to lament honestly before God. Whether it's this or any other area where you feel he hasn't heard your prayers, tell him what you feel. Tell him what you think. And let's move on now to our second word, another negative word. If you remember, there's 2 negative, then 2 positive. The second word is defeat. And here we'll cover the rest of chapter 1. In verse 5, God speaks. He responds to Habakkuk. Look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded, for I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. Now that sounds positive, doesn't it? Yes, God, you're going to do something incredible. You're going to fix this horrendous situation, but no. We can't read that as an awesome, exciting, inspiring verse because of what comes next. The astounding work that God is going to do, that they'll never believe, even if God tells them, is he's going to bring judgment on the nation of Israel for their sin. He's saying it's going to get worse before it gets better. Put it another way, he's warning them, defeat is coming. Verse 6, behold, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. And the rest of this chapter describes what these Chaldeans are like. They're vicious, they're hostile, they're their own standard of right and wrong. Verse 7, their justice and dignity go forth from themselves. Verse 11, their own might is their God. And so here's the situation. Habakkuk has lamented the injustice in the land and God's seeming indifference, and God responds by saying, defeat is coming. It's going to get worse before it gets better. So where are we? We've prayed about assisted suicide. We've lamented that God did not answer our prayers the way we wanted him to, and God seems to have brought defeat to our land. But who have we lost to? Verse 8 and onwards, it describes the Israelites losing to the Chaldeans as they sweep through the land, their horses swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves, intent on violence, mocking kings, scoffing at rulers. But who's the enemy who's defeated us like that? Our defeat's not at the hand of a Chaldean army, nor is it deep down to the dignity and dying lobby or to certain MPs. We avoid using language of fighting against certain MPs because I think when it comes to politics, that doesn't really help. But who is it that's swept through and routed us so comprehensively? The answer is we've been defeated by the idols of our modern age. The idols of autonomy and comfort and control and independence. They have swept through our nation and our parliament and our laws and left devastation in their wake. Think about it. Autonomy. I am the captain of my soul. I am the master of my fate. I have the right to end my life in the time and place of my choosing. Or my body, my choice. Forget there's another body involved. My autonomy will triumph. Autonomy will win. Or my comfort, this desire to avoid suffering at all costs. We invest in palliative care because we want to reduce suffering. End-of-life care, when it's properly funded and it's properly delivered, it works. But the idol of comfort, the desire to even avoid the risk of suffering, it won't allow that possibility. Or maybe the idol of control. Assisted suicide, it's often more popular among affluent communities. The people who have money are able to keep suffering and inconvenience at bay in so many areas of their life. Death is the great unknown, but assisted suicide promises you can control your death. Or the idol of independence, never having to be a burden to others, never having to suffer the indignity of having someone else wash you or needing help to go to the toilet. These idols, autonomy, comfort, control, independence, God's allowed them to defeat us, just as he allowed the Chaldeans to defeat Israel. And so we wonder, in this defeat in which we seem to be sitting, is this it? Is this where we are? Is this where we stay? Will it be one blow after another as these idols march on? Do you see why I told you at the beginning that the whole sermon's not negative? You needed faith in that statement if you were going to get this far. And that brings us neatly to our third word, which is faith. Habakkuk needed faith in God's words if he was going to process this defeat that they'd suffered. So picture the scene. Habakkuk standing on the city walls like a sentry looking out to the horizon. The sentry's job is to look out and see when the enemy is approaching the city so he can raise the alarm. But Habakkuk's not looking to see if the enemy's coming. He's looking from the city walls and waiting for God to respond. What's God going to do about all of this? He's cried out his lament. He's wallowed in his defeat, but this can't be the end of the story. So chapter 2, verse 1, he says, I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me. And will God respond? Well, yes. Verse 2 begins with the words, and the Lord answered me. You see, God's not missed anything that Habakkuk has spoken. God doesn't miss your sadness or your tears or your anger or your frustration. When you face injustice in your life and you don't know what God's doing, he doesn't even miss the unspoken anguish in your heart. God continues in verse 2. He says, write the vision, make it plain on tablets so he may run who reads it. In our politics today, many politicians don't want to be too definitive with their words. You notice that? They don't quite answer the question. Ever seen that? They leave wiggle room. And actually, before we get too frustrated at them, I do get it, because in the digital age, everything you say is recorded, and it will be played back to you 10 years from now. And so, they have to be careful before they say anything too definitive. It's politics 101. But that's not how God works. Says Habakkuk, I want you to write down what I'm about to say. Make it plain on tablets, really good handwriting. Write it on stone tablets, etched in. God is saying, what I'm saying to you now, I want you to know that it is absolutely certain. And he's saying that he may run who reads it. I think the idea there is getting a herald to run with the message, to distribute it far and wide, because God is saying the words I am giving you now are absolutely certain. What God is going to do, it's not immediate, but it is guaranteed. There's no doubt as to whether God will come through. God's not going to do a U-turn. And what does God promise in chapter 2? Well, he promises something for the future and something for now. For the future, look down to verse 14. So chapter 2, verse 14. Let's see what God promises. He says, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. So what's the earth filled with now? It's not the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. It's the knowledge of injustice. It's the knowledge of pain and suffering. It's the knowledge of death and defeat and despair. But faith sees that the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So think of sunrise. Imagine being up early enough that you see the first hint that sun is coming. And as the minutes tick by, more and more color starts to appear on the horizon, and you look around and the dark shadows around you start to dissipate, and you can start to see objects and identify shapes around you, and eventually the sun itself rises. That orange globe comes over the horizon and lights up the world. And there's nowhere its light doesn't reach. That's how comprehensive the spread of God's glory through the earth will be. All evil and suffering and tears and pain and death will fully and finally be removed from this world. That's guaranteed by verse 14. A promise of future hope. But also God gives a present reality in verse 20. Another thing that God says that's absolutely certain. Verse 20, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. You see, God is on his throne now. And there's nothing that escapes him, nothing he doesn't notice, nothing he doesn't see. He is ruling, he is reigning. And so we've got these two truths. We've got future promise and present reality. And what do we do with them? Well, we take hold of those truths by faith. Faith says, I believe what you say, Lord. I believe the future is coming when there will be no more death or sorrow or despair. And I believe that right now you are on your throne in your holy temple. Chapter 2, verse 4 says, the righteous shall live by his faith. So how do we keep going when we see injustice or violence? It's by faith. Faith that even though we're walking through the rubble, it's not the end of the story. And what does faith do? Faith believes God's promises. It says, the righteous shall live by faith. And who are the righteous? It's not those who've done everything right. Because if it was, that would be a category of one, wouldn't it? That would be a category that Jesus inhabits alone, and we'd all be left outside. No, who are the righteous who live by faith? That's anyone who has placed their faith in Christ. They are made righteous by Christ. Those who put their faith in Jesus, they put their trust in him, because we've all fallen short, haven't we? This isn't looking at certain people and saying, well, haven't you made terrible choices and aren't you a bad person? No, we have all chased the idols of autonomy and comfort and control and independence and everything else the world chases. But Jesus died for sinners like us. He died so that we could be forgiven. He died so that we could know his grace. He was buried in the tomb, and then on the third day he rose from the dead so that we can, each and every one of us, whoever you are and whatever you've done, can be reconciled to God. So faith is what makes us righteous. We trust in God. That puts us in the category of the righteous. And then as those who have been made righteous, faith is then how we go on to live. Faith sees that God is on the throne. The knowledge of his glory will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. So we need those eyes of faith. And then our final chapter of Habakkuk, our final word this morning, more briefly than any other, our final word is joy. So somehow, after all he's seen, and all God has told him is going to happen, yes, it's going to get worse before it gets better, somehow, Habakkuk finishes this book singing for joy. So what happened in our parliament in June? On Tuesday the 22nd, there was that vote to decriminalize abortion, even at the late stage of 39 weeks. It's Tuesday the 22nd. Friday the 25th, the vote to legalize assisted suicide. And then Tuesday 29th, just a few days later, the parliamentary prayer breakfast. 800, 900 people or so. Many of them Christians, along with their MPs who they'd invited to come along with them. And they gathered in Westminster Hall. So that's the oldest part of Parliament, the oldest room, really. And it's this huge hall. It would dwarf this nice big building you've got here. And at one end, there's an enormous oil painting showing the moment that Moses received the stone tablets from God on Mount Sinai. That's right there in Parliament. You've got that picture. And I think it's a reminder, isn't it, of our biblical heritage. A reminder that it's God's laws that have shaped our laws. And so in this Westminster Hall, underneath that great oil painting, just days after Parliament voted for death, 900 people actively participating in prayers, in listening to the word, in hearing John Lennox speak about the place of faith in public life, and 900 people singing. And they were singing these words, you'll know them. No guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me. From life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands my destiny. And so in the aftermath of those two votes, singing for joy. Chapter 3 of this book is Habakkuk's song. We know that because it's verse 1, it says, according to Shigionoth, which is a term sometimes used in the Psalms. We presume it's a musical instruction. And then the final verse is to the choir master with stringed instruments. We didn't have stringed instruments accompanying the Bible reading earlier, but we could have done. Matt, if you'd been reading it, you could have sung. So the whole of chapter 3 is a song. But we're just going to look at the last couple of verses of that song. Verse 17, though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. So this song, it's raw, it's realistic. Everything Habakkuk has relied on might be stripped away. Might be nothing to eat, nothing to drink, nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. He loses every luxury, the figs, the wine, loses every necessity, the flock, the foods, the cattle. He says, though all this might happen, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. So the good news here is that no matter what's happened in your life, every one of us, we have a past, don't we? We have things that we regret, ways we've fallen short, and sometimes that feels in ways that seem relatively small compared to others, and sometimes that feels in ways that are absolutely huge. But every one of us, no matter what we've been through, every one of us can sing for joy because he is the God of our salvation. He is a God who forgives, who wipes clean. He is a God who loves us, no matter who we are and what we've done. And as we respond to those 2 votes in Parliament that look like defeat, and we wonder what the outcome will be in the long term in our land, or maybe as you process the grief and pain and suffering that's hit your life in recent times, and you wonder how you're going to keep going. Here's the wonderful truth. If we walk the path of faith, we will eventually get to joy. It's not cheap joy. It's not deluded triumphalism. It's a joy that, in fact, you can only really experience when you have walked through lament and defeat and sin and brokenness and everything else, and you find that joy is out the other side. It's like going on a car journey, and you're the passenger and someone else is driving. You know where you're trying to get to. You know the route there. And the driver just seems to keep on taking every wrong turn you can imagine. A little bit frustrating, isn't it? And you're trying not to be a backseat driver, but after a while, I think you're going the wrong way. And at every turning, you think, why are you going that way? Why are you going that way? And then you find out, they know a route that you didn't know about. They get you to the destination. And sometimes it's like that when we sin and suffer and when everything seems to be going wrong in our own lives or in our nation's life, and we say, well, why are we going this way? Because that's not the path to joy. And God, you're taking me the wrong way. And why are you turning right there? That was a terrible decision. And then suddenly you realize that he knows a route to joy that we didn't know about. And it's a route that brings us more joy in the long run than we ever thought possible. And so as we close this morning, I want to invite you into that joy. And you will find in that joy strength. Verse 19, God the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on my high places. Imagine being like a deer running through the mountain. You asked me earlier, do I prefer reading or running? And I took the hardest question to answer because I wish the answer was running, but my knees always go, so the answer had to be reading. But God makes my feet like the deer's. Maybe not literally in my running ability, but in my faith and in my joy. I am not weighed down by my story or my past or anything else. God gives us strength to keep going. God gives us strength to keep believing. God gives us strength to keep singing for joy. And so may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him. Let's close by singing together. And what should we sing? Well, let's sing that song I mentioned a few minutes ago that they sung in Parliament the week after those votes. In Christ alone, my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song.